Rising from the mists of the North Sea, the holy island of Lindisfarne stands as a solitary outpost of faith. Protected by the raw, turbulent power of the ocean, it seemed unreachable, guarded by the unforgiving waves of Northumbria. Here, the Lindisfarne Priory emerged, a humble stone beacon of Christianity on the edge of the known world. For centuries, these ancient crosses stood watch, marking a landscape dedicated entirely to the spirit. Life here was defined by silence and routine. Monks walked these paths in a world disconnected from violence. It was a life of simple piety, where rough hands worked the earth and clutched the rosary in equal measure. Inside the sanctuary, the cold reality of the north faded into the warm, flickering embrace of the divine. Here, amidst beeswax and shadows, the wealth of the church was displayed not as treasure, but as tribute to God. In the scriptorium, scholars preserved the light of civilization, dedicating their lives to the written word. With ink and gold, they created masterpieces like the Lindisfarne Gospels, an act of artistic devotion. But this devotion amassed unprotected wealth. Gold and silver sat openly on shelves, guarded only by faith. The novices swept the floors, gazing out at the sea, believing the horizon was nothing more than an empty view. They saw the ocean as a wall, a barrier that kept the world at bay. They were wrong. Nature began to signal a disturbance. The birds fled the cliffs, sensing a shift in the wind that men could not yet feel. The skies turned bruised purple. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded these dark clouds as harbingers of doom. Lightning struck the waters, piercing the darkness, a violent warning of the storm about to break. The winds howled across the dunes, whipping the sand into a frenzy, unsettling the very earth of the island. Inside, the lights began to fail, a symbolic extinguishing of the peace that had reigned for generations. Even the most focused scholars paused, feeling a deep instinctual dread settle in the pit of their stomachs. The ocean churned, bringing debris to the shore. The island waited, tense and expectant. Then came the immense flashes of lightning, illuminating a sky that seemed to be tearing itself apart. The chroniclers wrote of fiery dragons flying in the era mythological interpretation of a very real threat. In the chapel, prayers turned to pleas for mercy as the monks huddled against the wrath of the heavens. But the storm passed. The sun rose on June 8, 793, bringing a morning of deceptive, blinding calm. Life returned to its rhythm. The shoreline seemed pristine, the danger apparently gone with the clouds. The waters lapped gently at the stones, hiding the fact that the sea was no longer their protector. A gaze towards the horizon shifted from relaxation to confusion. Something was breaking the line of the mist. Out of the fog, shapes emerged, not merchant vessels, but something darker, moving with intent. Square, striped sails caught the wind. These ships moved with an unnatural speed, closing the distance rapidly. The prow revealed the nightmare, a carved dragon head snarling at the Holy Land it was about to strike. Rows of shields lined the side. Behind them, the rhythmic, powerful stroke of oars drove the war machine forward. At the bow stood the predator, cold, calculating eyes fixed on the undefended wealth of the monastery. On the beach, realization struck. The isolation of the island was now a trap. Panic took hold, a frantic sprint across the dunes, a desperate race against the speed of the ships. The keels scraped the sand. The wolf had arrived at the door of the sheep. They did not negotiate, they charged. A wave of fur, leather, and steel crashing into the surf. The alarm bell rang out, a desperate, chaotic sound that signaled the end of the world they knew. Ink splattered across holy pages. The work of a lifetime ruined in a heartbeat of fear. Gates were barred, a futile attempt to hold back a force that knew no hesitation. But wood cannot hold against iron. The first axe blow splintered the defense. With a deafening crash, the barrier fell. The sanctuary was breached. They poured in like a flood. It's a blur of violence that overwhelmed the peaceful courtyard instantly. There was no mercy. The unarmed were met with absolute brutality. The axe fell. The shock of violence was absolute, freezing the blood of those who watched. Chaos reigned. Smoke began to rise as the raiders hunted down anyone who ran. The survivors retreated into the church, trembling hands fumbling to lock the inner doors. Outside, the blows rained down. Inside, the silence of prayer was shattered by the sound of splintering oak. The doors gave way. The silhouette of the pagan stood in the house of God. They strode to the altar, sweeping holy vessels to the floor. To them, it was not sacred. It was just metal. Rough hands grabbed the chalice. The contrast was stark. The purity of gold against the grime of war. Reliquaries were smashed, glass shattered as they tore out the silver, ignoring the bones of saints. One monk stood defiant, clutching the word of God as his only shield. He was cast aside. The warrior looked not at the words, but at the jewels on the cover. With a knife, he ripped the wealth from the wisdom, desecrating the book to steal the binding. The scriptures were discarded, pearls cast before swine, tossed onto the dirty floor. A boot stepped on the saint's face, a bloody footprint that marked the beginning of the Viking age. In the shadows, the brothers were bound, from servants of God to slaves of men. Fire climbed the walls. The holy smoke turned choking and black. Greed was triumphant. The raiders laughed, weighing the gold of the cross in their hands. The monastery burned, a black scar rising against the bright summer sky. The tragedy was complete. On the beach, the humiliation continued. Monks were dragged through the sand like cattle. Holy relics were tossed into the bilge, clattering against weapons and stolen goods. Ropes bit into wrists. The physical reality of slavery began to set in. A final look back. Heartbreak as the home of St. Cuthbert was consumed by flames. The ships pushed off. The raiders left as quickly as they had arrived. They sailed into the void, leaving behind a trail of foam and a shattered world. From above, Lindisfarne was a smoking ruin, small, isolated, and utterly destroyed. The news traveled fast, a shockwave of ink and parchment spreading from Northumbria to the courts of Europe. In the grand halls of Charlemagne, Alcuin of York stood reading the report, safe in his opulence. His face fell. The disbelief turned to horror. The unthinkable had happened. He sat to write, his hand trembling. He would pen the words that defined history. Nunquam talis terror. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain. He visualized the blood on the altar, a desecration that haunted his mind. The Church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God. Couriers rode through the mud. The warning was desperate. Nowhere is safe. King Ethelred sat in gloom, a monarch realizing his kingdom was defenseless against the sea. Back at the ruins, the sun set. The fires smoldered in the twilight. Survivors crept back from the dunes, weeping ghosts returning to a graveyard. They tended to the dead. The human costs of the raid lay scattered on the stones. The niche of St. Cuthbert stood empty. The spiritual protection of the island was gone. Across the sea, the landscape changed. We enter the rugged, frozen fjords of Scandinavia. Here, there was no mourning. In the smoky longhouse, there was only victory and ale. The loot was dumped on the table. Sacred chalices became mere bullion to be counted. A Bible was stripped. The Word of God burned as fuel, while the gold was kept. Holy cups were melted down. To the Vikings, the artistry meant nothing. Only the weight of the gold mattered. The cross versus the hammer. Two ideologies, two worlds now locked in a violent collision. In England, paranoia set in. Villagers stared at the horizon, waiting for the sails to return. Watchtowers rose on the coast, a desperate attempt to see the enemy coming. Treasures were buried. The church began to hide its wealth underground, fearing the next wave. Processions of penance filled the streets. They believed this was God's punishment for their sins. A new prayer rose from the lips of the faithful. From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord. Winter covered the ruins of Lindisfarne. A lone monk walked the snow, a testament to endurance. He knelt in the open air. The roof was gone, but the faith remained unshakable. But the raids did not stop. The map turned red. Lindisfarne was just the beginning. They carved their image in stone. Warriors with axes, immortalized in the land they terrorized. Winter did not stop them. Their ships smashed through ice, relentless in their expansion. Today, we brush the dirt from their swords. The evidence of their violence lies just beneath our feet. Hordes of silver coins tell the story of a plunder economy that bled England dry. Terror became the universal language of the 8th century. As the sun set red over the sea, the people of the North knew the age of peace was over. Seasons cycled rapidly over the ruins. Decades passed, but the threat remained. Monks tried to rebuild, but their faces showed the strain of a futile persistence. Eyes red from the salt wind scanned the horizon. The psychological toll of constant vigilance was breaking them. By 875 AD, they could endure no more. The decision was made to leave. In the crypt, they wrapped St. Cuthbert's coffin. The holiest relic could not be left behind. The ancient wood bore the carvings of apostles. It was not just a box. It was the heart of Northumbria. 7 monks lifted the heavy burden. They carried their history on their shoulders. They walked out of the gates for the last time, leaving the island that had been their home for centuries. Across the wet sands they marched, a procession of sorrow, abandoning the misty isle to the ghosts. For 7 years they wandered the mainland forest, homeless, soaked by rain, protecting the saint. Nights were spent in caves, huddled by firelight, keeping watch over the coffin in the dark. They moved from place to place, a wandering line of faith seeking a sanctuary that didn't exist. Until they found the rocky peninsula of Durham, a natural fortress defended by the river. They build again, but this time they build a fortress church, massive stones to withstand the fire. Durham Cathedral stands today as a symbol of that survival, invincible on its hill. But the Vikings did not just burn, they stayed. The map of England was drawn in half, the Danelaw. In York, the streets bustled, not with war, but with trade. Jorvik was a thriving Viking city. They were artisans, carving bone and crafting tools with the same skill they applied to war. They became traders, exchanging silver for wool, integrating into the economy they once plundered. Side by side, longhouses and chapels stood. A synthesis of cultures was growing from the ashes. To understand their dominance, we must look at their technology. The Viking longship. Built from oak, split with the grain, it possessed a strength that saws could not achieve. Clinker construction allowed the hull to flex. Iron rivets held together a vessel that moved like a living thing. It twisted in the storm. Where rigid ships broke, the longship bent with the waves. But its secret was the draft. Only 1 meter deep, they could sail where no other navy could follow. This allowed them to land directly on the beach at Lindisfarne. They needed no harbor, only sand. Full sails, waterproofed with fat, powered the fleet. The logistics of invasion were immense. With a square sail, they harnessed the wind, tacking across the open ocean to new worlds. Without compasses, they navigated by crystal. The sunstone guided them through the overcast north. Ravens found the land. They read the ocean like a map. It was a brutal existence, sleeping on open decks, exposed to the freezing spray of the Atlantic. Bailing water, fighting the sea. The voyage itself weeded out the weak. The prow was a work of art, carved to intimidate both enemies and the spirits of the land. Red eyes painted for terror, the face of the invasion. They would remove these heads when approaching home, a gesture of peace to their own gods. In museums, the Oseberg ship survives, a dark wooden ghost of a lost age. The carvings reveal a complex culture, a love of beauty intertwined with the tools of war. Modern replicas proved the design. They were stable, fast, and capable of crossing oceans. But when they landed, the artistry ended. The weapons came out. The Viking arsenal, simple, brutal, and effective. The bearded axe, a tool of the farm repurposed for slaughter. The hook pulled down shields. It was versatile, hooking, chopping, and crushing defenses with terrifying efficiency. In the forge, they folded iron. Pattern welding created blades that were both hard and flexible. The Ulfberth sword, the nuclear weapon of the Dark Ages. Crucible steel, centuries ahead of its time. Science reveals its purity, a blade that did not break when others shattered. The shield was more than protection. Linden wood and rawhide, rimmed with iron. The metal boss was a weapon. A punch from the center could break a jaw. Together they formed the shield wall, a human tank, impenetrable and disciplined. Bristling with spears, they moved as one organism. The ground shook with their step. Enemies crashed against it and broke. Physics favored the wall.
We are the steel! We are the
The wealthy wore chainmail, thousands of riveted rings turning them into iron men. The helmet had no horns. The spectacle helm protected the face, grim and practical. But most were commoners, armed only with an axe and a leather cap, driven by the promise of silver. And then the berserkers, warriors who fought in a trance, biting their shields in a drug-fueled rage. To the enemy, they seemed possessed, demons who felt no pain. The Sikh's knife, a tool for dinner, and a weapon for the close-quarters kill. Archers darkened the sky. Their arrows pierced deep. Testing proves the lethality. Leather armor offered little protection against the bodkin point. This war band, assembled on the hill, would terrorize England for 200 years. But the sword was hung up. The warrior was also a farmer. At home, life was peaceful. Green fields and grazing sheep. The foundation of their society was the land. Women held the power of the household. The keys at her belt symbolized absolute authority over the farm. They wove the sails that drove the ships. The economy rested on their labor. Fathers taught sons to carve, not just to kill. A family life existed behind the wall of shields. Society was stratified. Jarls, carls, and at the bottom, the thralls. Slaves drove the plow. The dark engine of their economy was built on forced labor. But they valued law. At the Thing, 3 men debated and recited the law from memory. Democracy had roots here. Disputes were settled with silver, not always blood. They preferred compensation to endless feuds.
Threefold repayment to the victim's kin.
They were fastidious. Combs and ear spoons reveal a people who cared deeply about hygiene. Merchants weighed silver with precision. They were traders first, raiders second. At home, they honored the old gods. Simple offerings to Thor and Freya in the quiet of the longhouse. The Skald kept the history alive. Sagas recited by the fire, binding the generations together. They valued intellect. Strategy games like Hanefetaf sharpened the mind for war and politics. They adapted to the cold. Skis allowed them to hunt in the deep winter snow. They created beauty, delicate gold filigree proving they were masters of art, not just destruction. But spring always returned. The rollers were laid out. The raiding season began again. Ships were loaded. A logistical machine set in motion. Goodbyes were said, tender moments before the violence. They sailed out. This time, they went further than anyone imagined. To the east, the Rus dragged their ships through the forests of Russia. The portage connected the seas. The Volga trade route opened the world. Goods flowed from the Baltic to the Black Sea. They met the Arab world. Furs exchanged for silver dirhams in the markets of the east. Coins found in Sweden bear Arabic script, proof of a global network. They reached Constantinople, the great city. The Vikings gazed upon the dome of Hagia Sophia. They became the Varangian Guard, elite protectors of the emperor, wielding their axes for gold. They left their mark. Halfdan was here, carved into the marble of the greatest church on earth. To the west, they battled the Atlantic, sailing into the unknown gray void. They found Iceland, a land of fire and steam rising from the ocean. Settlers claimed the land, building a new society on the edge of the world. Eric the Red found Greenland, a salesman selling a frozen dream to desperate farmers. But winter revealed the truth. Survival there was a brutal test of endurance. Leif Erikson pushed further, finding a land of vines and trees, Vinland. They walked in American forests, 500 years before Columbus. They met indigenous people, a tense first contact between two worlds. Landsoe Meadows proves the saga. The turf outlines confirm they were here. A bronze pin, unmistakable Norse design found in Canadian soil. The smoking gun. Their world spanned the globe, from Newfoundland to the Caspian Sea. Diversity of faces, traders, guards, farmers, explorers, all Vikings. But all ages must end. The door was closing. 1066. Halley's Comet streaked the sky, a bad omen for the kings of men. The last great invasion. 300 ships filled the Humber. King Harold Hardrada had come to claim England. The English marched north, a desperate race to catch the invaders unprepared. At Stamford Bridge, they were surprised. Unarmored and relaxing, the Vikings scrambled. A single berserker held the bridge, blocking an army with a massive Dane axe. He piled the dead high, a legend of unstoppable force. But a spear from below ended the stand, a cheap shot that turned the tide of history. The English poured across. The shield wall clashed on the riverbank. Harold Hardrada fell, an arrow to the throat. With him died the Viking age. Sunset over the slaughter. The river flowed red with the blood of the last great raiding party. Only 24 ships returned, a catastrophic loss that broke the power of the North. Days later, the Normans landed, descendants of Vikings, coming to conquer as Frenchmen. The raider evolved into the knight. The axe became the lance. The Bayeux Tapestry tells the tale. The Vikings didn't disappear. They transformed. William was crowned. The Norse bloodline sat on the English throne. The old gods faded. Crosses replaced dragons on the church roofs. Swords were melted into plowshares. The era of raiding ended. The era of farming returned. But their words remain. Sky, egg, window, anger. We speak their language every day. Castles rose. The landscape was changed forever. Stamford Bridge is quiet now, a peaceful field where an era died. But the DNA remains, a biological imprint stamped across the population of Europe. The face of the Viking lives on in the fisherman of York and the trader of Oslo. We name our days for their gods. Wednesdays Odin's, Thursdays Thor's. Their maritime genius shapes our ships today. The legacy of the keel endures. Back at Lindisfarne, the ruins are peaceful. The healing of time has washed away the blood. We look at their stones in museums. The threat has become history, safe behind glass. The Gospels survived. Culture triumphed over destruction. Fire, iron, and wind. The elements of a world that was raw and visceral. The monk stands on the shore, no longer afraid. The chieftain fades into the mist, heading for Valhalla. We pull back. Lindisfarne is just a speck on a blue planet, a turning point in human history. The storm is over. The sea is calm. Their art remains, complex, beautiful, and eternal. Sparks rise to the stars. The Viking spirit ascends. The storm of Lindisfarne